their parents. But compassion is a desire to relieve the suffering. So there's a big difference between empathy and compassion. And to some extent, I think, although there's a lot more to that, self-compassion is that idea of going, okay, these are not normal times. I have to be willing to give myself some self-compassion, relieve my own suffering from the fact that I feel like I haven't finished the fourth quarter very well. So we get that. I mean, I think I get that. So I'm probably good enough for now, because it doesn't mean you don't want tomorrow to be better, but you're willing to say, I gave it the best I could today. This is, under these conditions, this is what I can do. And so allowing yourself permission to realize we couldn't meet the normal standards we would meet as we end a school year. So with all of that in mind, I want to just once again say welcome to everybody that's joined us, and I hope this will be worthwhile. By the way, something really interesting came across my desk this morning, and that is, I'll show you in just a second. Yeah. So this actually was in a K-12 ed leadership thing that I get every morning. This came from the state of Nebraska, and they're really concerned about kind of school sports kickoff and mid-distance learning and what's going to happen in the fall when we return. I'm going to talk just a little bit about that later on, but I thought it was interesting that Nebraska was featured in your governor in terms of what's going to happen on June 1st in terms of things that can be allowed to happen in your schools or not. Regarding athletics and education, summer programs, and so on. And like everything, as I've talked about before, it's an unknown. And that's hard for us because we are in the planning business. As teachers, we tend to want to plan everything. And in a time of uncertainty, that's hard to do. But having talked about planning, I really have the primary thing I want to work with us all on today. And your responses are going to basically by typing things into the chat box. I want to really invite you to do that every time I ask you to. And when you do type something into the chat box, if you can remember to just tell us what school you're from, that might be helpful, because someone might see something you type and go, oh, I really want to follow up and talk to that school then, or that department. But we might not know what school you're from, because not everybody on this call knows everybody that well. So please make sure you just kind of indicate your school. We'll see your name, but indicate your school when you type something in. So in this session, we're going to look at what are you going to do in math, especially because it's so vertically connected, with all of the things that you were not able to cover yet. In other words, we don't have evidence that our students have yet learned the standards. Maybe you were able to do something in the e-learning environment, but you weren't able to really monitor student learning of it. So there's a, right, so it could be standards you just couldn't get to, or it could be standards that we're not sure if the students have learned that information or not. So we're going to look at that and kind of a 4-step process to follow this summer to be ready for next fall. And then we're going to look at a brief summary of your the feedback report that you gave us, the MOEC math team, from our work for this past year. Then I'm going to give you a brief kind of feedback back about our school site visits on March 4th and 5th and how that went. And then we're going to do an end of the year self-evaluation that we're actually required to do, because we have to provide some evidence of the growth of the participants during this 2 years or 1 or 2 years you've been with us. And so there's a form. You'll see it's going to be, we think it's pretty easy to do, and hopefully it all goes smoothly for you to fill it out while we're still on the call. And then I'm going to explain how we're going to use that information for our focus for our work together next year and what that might look like. All right. So it's really strange that the pandemic happened. I think from about a year ago, this time, a little bit earlier than that, my team that works with me, including Sarah Schul, who a lot of you know pretty well, we sat down and said, we really need to write some guidance on how to do a mathematics unit plans, how to create a unit calendar, what kinds of things should you consider in those unit plans, how do we even unpack standards. And the reason we thought we needed to do this was because we were helping schools like yours, like we've done with you guys, develop their common assessments, but they were struggling to develop them because they didn't really have identified standards, essential standards for each unit, much less calendars that kind of said, okay, this unit's going to take 23 days or 32 days or whatever, and here's how we're going to test, and here's what we'll do. So we're like, well, let's give schools guidance on that. On the screen, you actually see our 3.5 book. That's the first book that came out. It just came out a month ago. The 6.8 book, the middle school book's coming out in about a month. The high school book for this series, this unit planning series, won't be out until the fall. But what we decided to do was to write books appropriate to the different grade levels, because your needs are obviously a little bit different than a pre-K2 teacher might experience in their unit planning. But all of that to say, this is the pandemic has taken us to this place where this is now urgent, because the reality is we've got a fourth quarter of 2019-2020 in which there are a lot of standards in math that have not yet been learned, as I indicated earlier. So what I'd like to do is take a minute. I'm going to actually give you 2 minutes, so type fast. And what I'd like you to do is in the chat box area for Zoom, you're probably pretty familiar with Zoom now. If you wouldn't mind type in, and by the way, we can keep a record of what you've done in there, so that's helpful too, in case people want to, they don't remember what someone said, we can keep that chart of your comments. But what I'd like you to do is think about your math department. And I know some of the schools have been working on how they're going to deal with this. Could you just give us some brief explanation of what your current plan is to teach the not yet standards from the prior year? So how's the geometry team going to take the algebra standards that haven't been learned? How will the algebra 2 team take the geometry standards that have not been learned? How are your freshman courses going to find out what kids did not learn yet in 8th grade because of what happened in the fourth quarter? So if you're working on this, could you give us some advice and type it in, and we'll take a look at what you're typing. I see some of you are already responding, which is great. So I'll be quiet for a minute, and you can read what people are saying, or feel free to type your stuff in too. Don't forget, tell us what school you're from so that we can kind of go, okay, I'm going to go talk to that department. All right, go ahead and get started. All right, these are really awesome, and like I said, we'll have a record of this so we can send it out to you. Okay. All right, everybody, thanks. And if you still have something else you want to type in and let us know, please don't hesitate to do that. But our 2 minutes is up. I'm gonna pull us back together. And I really appreciate many entries and a lot of the different things that you're thinking about. It just shows a lot of you, like I said, we are by nature professional planners. So that's good that you're working on the planning aspects of this. I do want to say this as I move us forward, and that is that I think in order to do this really well, it needs to not be happenstance, but it needs to be a very intentional plan. And from Sarah's and my point of view, it's sort of a 4-step process that you want to follow and work on. Now, from my perspective, you can do it 2 different ways. One would be to bring together a summer task force of representatives from the different courses. And you might have, including honors. I saw several people making comments about honors. And I also saw, I thought this was really a great comment. I'm not sure which school said it, but I saw a comment about, this may not be a 1-year solution. And that's absolutely true. In other words, for example, things that perhaps are not yet standards in Algebra 1 because that you're going to have those kids for a couple of more years, you have a couple of years to kind of integrate and figure out where you're going to help make that up. So it doesn't all have to be done next year. You could have a broader range. The same thing, like, for example, in an honor strand, you can do the same thing. You can say, okay, well, we'll do this sophomore, junior, senior year then because of what happened to these freshmen, right? And so on. So I'm going to walk you through these 4 steps and give you a little bit of a chance to talk about it too along the way. Actually, a lot of you already talked about number 1, that you're going to make an effort to identify these not yet learned standards. That's really good. And I think we'll talk just briefly about what that might be like, and then it'll either affirm what you're doing or I might be challenging you here to think about a few things. I also have a form to help you with these 4 steps, and we are providing you that form in Word as a link. You'll get that in just a little bit, and you feel free to use it if it's helpful, or make it your own, or don't even use it. It's really up to you, but it's a form that each team in your math department could actually complete in order to get through these 4 steps of this process. So let's just dig in and take a look. I'll walk us through these 4 steps. So the first step is identifying previous grade level standards not learned yet. So I think what might be useful would be in the course before, identify all the essential standards that teacher team is pretty confident they have learned. Believe it or not, that column on the left is actually pretty important. It's not just enough to say, hey, we don't think they learned, and here's the list. So that's why you're not making any assumptions. So they would actually list out any essential standards for the year before, the course before in most cases, of what they have learned. Then in the right-hand side, essential standards not learned yet. And what they might want to do is put an asterisk by the ones that, because remember I said it really fast, but there's a difference between standards that haven't been learned yet because it wasn't even addressed. We just didn't get to it. Tim, we didn't get to any of the quadratic stuff in Algebra 1, not one part of it. Okay. All right, thanks for letting us know. None of it. Or we did cover all these standards, but we weren't able to assess these different standards in quadratics. And so there's a difference between not learning it, meaning I don't know if you really know it because our assessments of it were spotty, and versus we didn't even address it. Kids didn't even have access to it. So you might want to identify 2 different categories of not yet standards, okay? In essence, I think here, you also have to be really clear, whoever's leading the task force in your math department, exactly how are these going to be shared? And you know how I am, who exactly is going to lead this? Don't say, well, we're going to share. No, who's going to make sure everyone shares correctly? So who will be sharing these? Who's going to collect it? How does it get shared? And when? I would put a timeline on this. By June 15th, all of this will be done. And it will be shared so that we can start working this summer to figure out the adjustments we're going to have to make. So I would, it's basically creating a SMART goal, isn't it, around this? We're going to put a time bound on it. We're going to put someone in charge of it. We're going to, it's results oriented in terms of here's the standards that were not addressed, that we have actual results from our surveying of the previous year. So I just would be really intentional about number 1. So what I'd like to ask you to do here before I move out of this one is I'm going to ask you to take a minute to once again just comment this only. Tell us the date in which you expect to have this process, this step completed. Just put the date. What do you think is a reasonable date to have this particular step completed? Maybe for some of you it's tomorrow. I don't know. Maybe it's May 31st. Maybe it's June 15th. But would you just throw in your date so we can kind of see what other people are thinking? All right, thanks. That should go pretty quick. I'll give you a minute to toss in your date there. Thanks, everybody. All right, that's awesome. So I'm gonna, thanks, and if you still are entering your data in, please go ahead, but I'm gonna keep us moving along. The next piece of this deals with academic and instructional rigor. So the reason I'm bringing this up, sorry, let me get back here. Two things I want you to think about as you're collecting this data. One is that when you think about a standard not being a not yet standard, you have to think of all three legs of the standard stool, so to speak. Because when we talk about the rigor of any standard, and I know everybody in this call knows this because that's why you're high school math teachers, but every standard basically has three essential components wrapped into the big essential standard. One is conceptual understanding of the standard. For example, what's my conceptual understanding of quadratic functions? Two is my procedural fluency with the standard, being able to graph a quadratic function. But three is the applications, being actually able to do problems that use graphs and my conceptual understanding of a quadratic function. So when you think about this, you need to break it down into smaller bits sometimes and say, okay, of these three legs of the stool, which ones are essential, which ones are, we're going to do, maybe only the conceptual part. Perhaps we'll only do the procedural part, which is a little dangerous because then you're abandoning understanding, or we'll abandon application, and you have to make those decisions. So just keep the rigor issue in mind because you don't want to lose rigor. I would rather you do fewer standards with the rigor than a lot of standards and only doing one leg of the stool. Kids will go on to the next course then really not as prepared as they should be. Another thing to think about too that Sarah and I wanted to share with you is something like this. If there's a positive potential outcome of the pandemic, it's identifying by student, and I'm laughing because I'm pointing to my screen. Of course, you can't see what I'm pointing to, but it's identifying by student the standards they don't know yet. And so literally providing to the next, if your student management system allows you to, providing by student targeted standards they still don't know. And that it's not just like this universal thing, which it might be. We just didn't get to quadratics at all, Tim. Or it might be, well, for all of these students moving forward, standard 4 is weak on these 5 students, so we give them targeted intervention eventually because we know that. So it's something to just think about down the road. If we were to work with you next year, again, this would be something we might dig into and show you some ways of doing it really well, as an example. The second thing to think about, if you recall from my original kind of 4-step process, is to really make sure that you see this as an issue of embedding the standards that have not been learned. And I know probably no one in this group is doing this because I just don't think you would be. I don't think you see world that way. Hopefully, at least after 2 years with us, you don't. But one thing you don't want to do is start next year just reteaching all the stuff you think they don't know, or teaching the things that they haven't had access to, and delaying your curriculum until November, right? That would be the worst thing we could do pedagogically. The best thing we can do is what we call embed the standards into point of use. So for example, let's just take quadratics not being done in Algebra 1. Then is there a place in geometry where it might be natural? Maybe when you're doing I don't know, properties of parallel lines and transversals, where you might have some angle measure congruence where you're looking at the equality to try to find the value of x that allows those angles to be congruent. If you put quadratics in there, then you'd have to do some point of use teaching about how to solve a quadratic equation, right? So you got to think about, all right, either we're not going to do, or maybe you're going to hold that all off till algebra 2. Either way, you want to put these things in at point of use when you actually need it for the next course, not just as a front load stacking. That would actually be considered malpractice. So I want you to really think about, okay, how are we going to embed the standards into next year? And one of the easiest ways to do this is with your team calendars. That's why I have it picked. Now, I get it. This, if you're looking closely at my calendar on the screen, it's a 4th grade calendar. I know. And that's because it's out of our 3-5 book sample. But what you're going to notice, there's 2 things I want you to notice. Now, this happens to be a calendar for the entire year, because whether you know it or not, in 4th grade, if you have your own children in 4th grade, you know this, there will only be about 7 units of math for the year. And they get spread out over these units over a long period of time. I mean, in high school, we tend to have about 10 units per year. We compact things a little bit differently. But notice here, in each unit, there's an arrow that kind of points to the number of days, 20 days, 20, you know, that arrow says, you know, it's kind of showing you how many days are available for instruction versus how many days are, you know, we might also need. The calendar will get into how many days we need for testing, all these things. But also notice some of them are bold and some of them are not bold. So that's another thing to think about. Is this so essential if we don't teach it this year, the kids will just get crushed? So if it is, it's bold, meaning we got to do it. We can't not do it. And we're going to have to do it in that unit. We'll figure out a bigger calendar, but we're going to have to do it. If it's not bold, then we consider that sort of like, all right, it's not so essential. It might be more supportive, or maybe we can teach it outside of our normal class time, which I'll explain in a little bit. So the main thing is just to make sure, where are we going to engage kids into these standards? So what I'd like to do is, again, this will get a little typing on your part. Could we stop here for a minute? Could you talk about how, and I know I'm asking you to do this in a couple of sentences, so I get it. Just do the best you can. How are you currently planning in your high school math department to embed the standards into next year's units? What have you thought about for this? How are you going to change your calendars, or what are you going to do to kind of re-engage or even teach, because they didn't even have access to it, the content that wasn't there? What's your current plan? Can you tell us in a couple of sentences? All right, I'll be quiet and invite you to type some things in. Again, please remember to let us know your school. Thanks. Okay, those 2 minutes go fast. Reading your responses are great. It's really, as you can see, very dependent on your particular district and perhaps some of your feeder schools as well into your high school, especially for the freshman Algebra 1 courses, and getting that information will be really important. So thanks, everybody. This is really great information. And I'll talk about why I'm asking you these questions too a little bit later as well. Moving us on, I want to just remind you that those learning progressions are really important, and they help frame the learning story. So I think from what it also does, so many of you did respond, yes, we're going to just embed them into the as we go along into point of use. The value of that too is creating I think a sense of wholeness for the child, that that, hey, look, we get it, you didn't get to have your regular school year, but you're now part of this class, and we're going to really, as we go throughout this year, I'm aware of that, and I'm going to take you I'm going to help you with that. You don't need to be panicked about it. We're not going to be behind. I'm not going to be constantly saying to you, you're behind, we're behind. But rather, it's just going to be, hopefully, back to normal. So in that particular document that I'm going to give you, we do have a place to where you can kind of do this. Okay, here's the essential standard that wasn't learned. Here's where we're going to fit it in. And some of you actually talked about how you're planning on doing that. And then idea for standards to drop or de-emphasize. This third column is really important. Don't dismiss it at hand. I think it's going to, at Stevenson, we're pretty clear about, we do this every year, whether we're in a pandemic crisis like now or not. Every year we say, okay, what are the standards we worked on last year in this course? This is what we do in the summertime, that we can de-emphasize. It really isn't, all that the best use of our time. We maybe spend a day, when we do our calendars, 1 or 2 less days on it. Maybe we drop it all together because we feel like it's going to be done somewhere else. So that'll be something to just ask yourself, is there, how is there some curriculum we can cut out here? And I would just encourage you to do that. So, whether it's quadratics or volume and surface area, like in geometry, those things that you might have missed out on. In Algebra 2, probably, I don't know, depend on your particular curriculum. And for us, it would be things like our probability and stats units and the trig units, and then where would we place that in the 4th year course, or at least our understanding of the elementary elements of it in order to get to it. So it's a tough one. It's a tough call. And I get that. So here's an example of an actual calendar, not just the unit planner, but the calendar itself. And again, apologize because this is a 4th grade sample, but because that's the one we have at the moment. But I think I really like the idea when you go to sit down this summer with your task force, however you're going to do it, really doing it with a calendar that's very visual. So we literally see, now this one happens to say January 6th through January 28th. I'm more like day 1, day 2, day 3, because I'm not sure exactly when we're going to be able to start that unit, right? But that's fine. And what you see is what I talked about before. All the assessments are also planned into the calendar. So you see how many days we're going to work on each standard and the things we're going to do. Then you see when we're going to give our assessments. And those yellow boxes are important because they indicate in a professional learning community culture, these are the moments you have to be caught up. So every teacher on the team, because it's at these moments we're checking in together on our student progress. So that's why those are highlighted, because we're saying you have 4 days, 5 days, but you can get through it however you want, but by that 5th day, you've got to be ready for that first assessment. By the 22nd day, you've got to be ready, 23rd day for that last assessment, and so on. So there's that kind of understanding of, here's when the unit's going to begin and end. Here's the learning progression throughout the unit. Here's the extra number of days we're going to have to spend. So now instead of 25 days, we're going to spend 28. And then here are the revisions we have to do to our assessments in order to accommodate that. I know. So it's a lot to think about, right? This is huge. I mean, it's not just saying, oh, we've got some standards we haven't taught, let's figure out how to make it up. I mean, to me, it feels very comprehensive. But for those of you that already have these calendars in place, this should be pretty easy to do, because it's just a matter of saying which standards are we going to plug in, or we need one extra day with this part now. So you're going to end up getting to May and maybe feeling like something at the end of next year is going to get crowded out a little bit. That's why you kind of have to look at the total picture during the summer. One of the things I want to tell you when you think about these calendars is an understanding of this last one, number 4, and then when I finish this, I'm going to ask you to identify this in just a minute in the chat. It'll be really important. But one thing that I want you to think about here is this. So when I see the standards from the year before, I really need to think of the not learned yet stuff in 2 different ways. I have to think of some of it as tier 1. And what's tier 1 intervention? Tier 1 intervention, if you recall from our work this past year, is about, we have to teach this. I have to put it into my instructional design. It's going to have to be a lesson. I'm going to have to provide my students formative feedback and give them differentiated instruction on those tasks. I'm going to have to do all that good instruction stuff. In other words, I'm going to need a day. Again, I'm pointing at my calendar. I'm going to need a day in that calendar to do it, right? So we recognize that standard is so important. I can't let it go outside of my normal classroom period. If I teach 3rd period geometry, I'm going to have to make this an additional lesson, kind of thing. That's what tier 1 is. So I sort of change my core instructional calendar in order to accommodate it. But it could be that some of these standards that you're going to get from the previous grade, like something on slope or linear equations or functions, or we didn't get to any of the probability except for this. We got to this part of probability, but not that. It could be that some of this can be done at what's called tier 2 level. Supplemental intervention. And what does that mean? Well, tier 2 means basically this, that you're able to cover that additional not yet standard, but you won't need another day of instruction. You won't need to affect your calendar, because we'll teach it in this intervention time. We'll have this extra class that runs once a week, and we'll get some of those things taught in there for our freshmen, let's say. Or a lot of you have built-in intervention time for your math students, especially at the freshman or sophomore level. So it would be in there that you'll say, you know what, we don't need to spend additional tier 1 time. Although it could be, but we'll primarily do this standard in supplemental work outside of normal class time. Tier 3 is more what we're doing with special ed, and I'm not going to get into that today because of time. So what happens is it kind of, I love this slide because it kind of represents a box that I'm going to actually have you talk to us about in just a second. On the left-hand side, tier 1 says, all right, I got this information from the course before me's team. I got this information from the 8th grade teacher team. I got this information, I'm a pre-calc teacher, from the advanced algebra 2 teachers. And I have to ask myself, is this an essential standard not yet taught or addressed that I'm going to have to get it in there somehow? Is it a prior knowledge standard for an essential standard in my course? Our Algebra 1 kids didn't get through any of the quadratics, right? Let's just say. I'm now teaching Algebra 2, Unit 5 on quadratics. Well, probably Unit 2 or 3, depending on what your sequence is. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to add 5 days to this unit. It's a tier 1. I can't just say, hey, we'll get that to them in some intervention time. Tier 2, look at the 2 descriptions for tier 2 though. A tier 2, an outside of class time intervention, means that it's an essential standard, but it could be quickly reviewed by most of the students. When we really look at it, that kind of review of slope, we could probably do that outside of of our class. I could do that pretty quickly somehow in some type of intervention activity. And is this an essential standard that can be taught before its unit in a shorter amount of time? Meaning, would there be a way for me to have all the kids taking Algebra 1 in their additional Algebra 1 time, knowing that we're about to do this in Unit 3, we give them a crash course on this in their intervention, because it's a prior knowledge skill that will help them with Unit 3. So when you think about embedding the learning that you want, the standards that you want them to learn, it's kind of the beauty of it is Tier 2 gives you the opportunity to not have to do it all in class. If you have interventions, some of it could be Tier 2. So what I'd like to ask you to do now in the chat box would be to indicate for us, and if you want to be really specific to topics, that's fine, because some of you have been thinking pretty deeply about this as it applies to your school. So what I'd like you to talk about is, what are some of the things you think you could get done as part of Tier 2 time? Not Tier 1, but Tier 2. Some of the not yet stuff, but we won't have to change our calendar. We think we can get it done with our kids outside of the normal class time. And we do recognize we may have to figure out a way to actually provide that outside of class time this summer as we work with our administrators. Okay, ready? Go ahead and give us some of your best thinking of what you're doing right now in this area. And remember, these are Tier 2 ideas, times review that you're going to do outside of class. And thanks, everybody. Keep typing them in. This is really helpful for us to see this. All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to pull us back together, and I really appreciate you sharing some of these things. So my brain, just so you know, as I was reading through all your different choices, and it's funny because I actually took the slide out of our presentation today, but you may or may not remember this. When I worked with you earlier this year, in November, early December, I think it was, I remember I gave you 5 criteria for effective Tier 2 interventions. And one of the criteria is that it's required. Now, a lot of what I saw come across that screen looks to me like it's going to be required. Kids have to go get that help, right? The reason I'm mentioning this to you is because I saw some of the things, though, that you put up there that I'm not sure they're required. Unless you provide a late bus home or you do some other thing, then the kids don't have to show up for the intervention. But this is a crisis, so it's a little different. Here we've lost a fourth quarter in some cases of learning for many of our students, and in math, because as I used to explain to my mentor and colleague Rick DeFore, we're different. You know, we need last year to do this week this year. So that providing that tier 2 intervention is going to be pretty crucial, but it needs to be required so that students who are in need of it. I also saw some other creative ideas in there about how you could make it work in class, and I think that's absolutely okay, as long as it's outside of the lesson part of class itself. So anyway, great thoughts and great ideas, and I really do wish you the best as you begin to think through just identifying which standards, because remember, you don't want leave any of this to chance. You want it for sure to be an intentional part of your team's work for next year. Well, then that brings us to the question of, well, what happens if teaching at the start of the year is virtual? I know. I've thought a lot about this because Nebraska, you really aren't any different than what a lot of states are going through in terms of, even right now, if I look at the national data, your state says it's going to be up to local districts. So one district could actually open in August with kids coming back in, and another district 10 miles away may not, and say, well, we're going to delay the start, or we're going to start, but we're going to start virtually. And all of it's going to have to depend on something none of us control, which is, the rate of the data that we get back on what's going on with the pandemic. So to me, is it realistic that there are parts of our country, including parts of Nebraska, that could start virtually in 2021? Yes, I think it could happen. You don't want it to happen, but it could. And so the question becomes really, then what? What do you do? Because at least this past fourth quarter, you had connection. You'd already been with the kids for 3/4 of a year. So your personal connection and investment in them gave them a reason to do the work and keep plugging away, right? But I think in this case, we have the dilemma of, I don't even have a connection with them yet, and yet I have to start virtually. So there's a lot of advice that's out there about that, but the part that I will tell you regarding standards, math standards, would be to focus a little bit differently than if you had them in your classroom. And Sarah and I, when we've thought a lot about this, every standard's either need to know, important to know, or nice to know. And for next year, nice to know pretty much goes out the window. If you're virtual, important to know sort of goes out the window. And you say, it's really important, Tim, that they know these 10 things. And I'm like, yeah, but what are the 3 things that if they don't learn them in the next month, life falls apart for this child, mathematically speaking? Okay, really, I got to distill it down to, 3. Give me 3, not 10. So what happens is you end up saying, instead of having these standards, all the important and need to know stuff per day, like that calendar I showed you, you say, what's my one thing you have to know this week? And you change the grain size of learning to a week, not a day. And in that week, you say, okay, here's the one standard I really want you to know. Maybe there are some other standards inside of it, but there's one. And in order to learn it, here are the tasks and activities I'm going to ask the kids to do. Maybe it's synchronous, maybe it's asynchronous, depends on access to technology and all the other kinds of inequities that can be created by this. I can't answer that for you, but I think it's smart to adapt your calendar to a need to know weekly thing and limit it to one thing you need to know. So that's my best advice I have at the moment, if you have to start virtually. It's not ideal, and hopefully you'd recover once you get back in with students again. And each of you are going to have to adjust, and I'm sure your districts are working on their plans now to how they're going to handle that. All right, so with all that said, thank you very much for kind of participating in this part of it. I do think, and I hope that that the tool that we have for this, that we're going to make available to you, will be useful at helping you with working through it if you need it, whatever you need from it. All right. Debbie, any questions? Are we good so far? All right, I got the thumbs up. Yay, thanks. All right, so I want to take a few minutes before we start digging into our final part with the survey. I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about results from your survey that you did for our MOEC work, for kind of the mathematics work we went through this past year. One of the questions asked about what did you think the purpose of our consortia work's been? Because we're only one aspect of the consortia's work, which is much bigger than us, but the mathematics in the higher grades has been one thing we've been doing for the past 2 years, and with some of you just this past year. So the first thing was asking the question, what do you think the purpose is? And number one answer we got was improving our total math department to work as a team to implement common assessments and assignments, and that certainly has been a big part of the work. The ultimate goal, someone else said, or was a general theme, is to create processes, and I really like that because that's exactly what it is. Our work is designed to create a process, just like I just showed you. Here's a 4-step process for getting through from the standards not learned to readiness for the fall. That allows us to find evidence of student learning and be able to improve on that learning even as we grow. And I think that sums it up really well. That has been our purpose for coming together and doing the work we're doing for the consortia. A lot of people said something to the effect of a collection or collective of like-minded school districts that are working to achieve greater success for our math students. And one thing that's going to come out in just a minute that I heard loud and clear from your survey is that as we continue, you really would like more time to share across districts. And I think just now, seeing the way you were sharing in our Zoom, which is really restrictive for all of us. It restricts me, it restricts you. But seeing that kind of sharing, I know you would just love to be able to sit with each other for a little bit and really pick each other's brains more. And that's something that I think we're going to take to heart in terms of how we might think about our work together next year. You were asked, has it been valuable? 97% of you said yes, so thanks for that. A lot of you said, well, it depends on the cohort year. Yeah, some of the first-year folks said, we felt like we were getting rushed all year long. Some of the second-year folks said, we felt like it was being repetitive. Everybody said, if you look right below the word teacher in the Wordle, which was a Wordle of all your responses, the word lot, L-O-T, everybody said it was a lot. Whatever, we did a lot. PLC time came up as it was really valuable if we had built-in PLC time in our school district. Others said, but if we don't have PLC time, I'm going back. I don't even get time to talk to my fellow colleagues about any of this. And so I think there was some frustration with that, which is understandable. A lot of you talked about tier 2 time, which is also why I just spent so much time on that as an important part of how you're going to respond in the fall. And then I think there were definitely quite a few comments about going deeper was really valuable, but then what's really interesting is going deeper was also what you wanted if we continue with the program and providing this as part of the consortia's activities. So should we continue? 64% yes, said yes. Many of you said we'd like more sharing, which I just mentioned. Sarah got a lot of nice kudos, and I'm mostly putting this up to T. Sarah, but which is of course why I love Sarah. One of the things about Sarah that is really great is, I think we complement each other really well, and so Sarah has a way of sort of seeing the world, which I think can be really helpful. Seeing the math world we live in as high school math teachers, especially. New members, a lot of you said if we continue, you'd like to bring new faces in that haven't been able to be part of it yet. And that doesn't apply to everybody, but there were a lot of schools, it's a wide group of districts that participate. And so, that would be something we'd want to target and make sure we get newer people involved. And then, of course, going deeper. For example, we've got quite a few comments about going deeper on instruction and really taking what we did on March 4th and 5th, but providing deeper models for the instructional elements and the instructional process, which is certainly something we can look at. I think also going deeper on the Tier 2 models and programs and sharing, again, what's going on in other schools. This connects really nice to, I think, to did we meet expectations? I always find the question meeting expectations a little bizarre because from my perspective, either you had really low expectations coming in and so we were great, or you had really high expectations and so we would fail. But either way, I appreciate the really high response and would say that many of your comments were exactly what you see on the screen. And that is that it really solidified a lot of what you believed in, but also challenged you to think differently. So we appreciate that and thank you for that. Some feedback before we get into our final survey on March 4th and 5th. This comes from my colleagues who were in your schools as well as my own feedback. And I think the first thing I want to tell all of you on this call, all of you on the webinar, is, and I'm sure you've been challenged by this with what you've had to go through in the last 9 weeks. But we were all impressed with the professionalism. You know, a professional is someone who lives by standards. An amateur wouldn't have standards. You just do whatever we feel like doing. Or as my colleague Rick DeFore would say, we just do what we damn well please. But a professional doesn't do that. They actually live by standards, they abide by standards, and they work together to learn from one another in their standards. And we found every school we went into, the attitude of all of you was extremely professional, and we thank you for that. The second thing we found was everyone was prepared. I mean, I know some of the lessons probably weren't as great as you wanted them to be, and you didn't have quite as much time to get them perfected or shared out the way you'd want. But trust me, we do a lot of this, and you were prepared. And not just logistically, but in terms of what you were hoping to learn from it. And that was really impressive. Both of my days were very unique, as was everyone, and yet we all walked out of there like going, wow, you know, yeah, there's room for growth, but people really care about students and about learning. So we wanted you to know that. The level of participation, especially in the debriefing, you handled it pretty well. And the fact that we had participation from administration as well as from colleagues, I think was really important to us. And, you know, because it's very revealing. When you come into each other's classrooms, you're peeling away the onion and being very transparent and vulnerable. And the only way vulnerability works is if it's a loop, if you're vulnerable back. And you know, and so we greatly appreciated that. We thought that was really well done. From an instructional advice point of view, I would say that everyone, myself included, needs to work on student engagement, just getting the kids more actively engaged so that we can see and hear what they're doing, and making sure that it's well balanced with, of course, the need for direct instruction and continuing down that path. Those are our observations. And we were very grateful for the opportunity to see you at work in your classrooms with the work you were doing. This is just something I want to share with you as you think about next year, not only in your own lesson design, but also in if you have to continue. I saw several of you said you do a flipped classroom as part of your intervention. And I would say to you, great, but does it meet these standards? So anytime you do anything, you got to ask, because we're professionals, what are the standards we apply to it, right? So what you see here is that everything you need to know about building a great screencast video. This comes from the Cult of Pedagogy. And if you just look up Cult of Pedagogy, April 26th, you'll find the whole article and all the detail on it. And what they do, what this one does is kind of indicate, as you can see from the bar chart, if you just go and look at it, it's what makes Zoom so hard. After 6 to 9 minutes of video, you're crushing it. You're going to lose about 50% of the students will stop listening. I don't even know how you're still listening, quite honestly. Um, but you're hanging in there with me. So I've given some breaks, but not really significant breaks, right? So it's hard. But in a typical streaming video that we give kids, maybe asynchronously, so we do it, then we put it out there for them to watch and do their assignment. It's basically about 50 minutes. After 12 minutes, I'm sorry, 50% up 9 to 12 minutes. And after 12 minutes, we just lose them. They fall off the cliff. So the same thing as you think about your instruction when we come back, especially if you have to keep kids socially distanced, how are you going to keep them socially distanced and yet let them talk to each other in a meaningful way? So lots of challenges ahead. And I know that when it comes to the student engagement issue. All right, so there's just a little article that might be helpful reading for you this summer. I know for the videos that I create, this has really helped me a lot. And I have no video over 4 minutes anymore. And that's on purpose. So it's these short bursts that you move through, if you're following something I'm teaching to a class online, for example. All right. So now what we're going to do in these final 15 minutes, well, actually you're going to have a little less than 15 minutes, is I'm going to ask you to go online and fill out a self-evaluation form. And the reason I'm asking you to do this is because we need this information for the people we report to, because this is part of a grant project. And we have to report back to the grantors through the university, what we actually accomplished. So what you're going to see here, this is actually an end of the, we actually put this in your packet when we came out to visit you in March, but this is a tool we use to assess the different things we've worked on with you. And as you can see in the tool, that there are, in each of the categories that we have, you can see, so they're in assessment intervention, we talked about team action 1 and developing high quality common assessments, team action 2, using those assessments formatively, team action 3, high quality math lesson for instruction. So we basically took you through our books, the 3 books and the 6 team actions. And notice at the bottom, we actually ask you to rank, check which ones your team is really good at or you've gotten good at now in these self-ratings, and then rate yourself 1, 2, 3, or 4, or rate your team 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the questions asked. And a 1 means, well, Tim, for example, let's take the very first bullet under Team Action 1. Develop common balanced assessments aligned to and organized by the essential standards for the unit. Check. We're doing that. And we are at a 3. We're implementing it. We haven't all embraced it yet, but we have implemented it. So a 3 means we're implementing. A 4 means we all love it. We've embraced it. No one's resisting. We're awesome. Our team is awesome. All right. So you have to think about it in terms of the teams you served on throughout the course of this year. So the survey is going to take you about 10 minutes, probably 12. We're going to give you time to do it. And then I'm going to bring us all back together right before we get off the call. And you have been sent an email, correct?
Yes, but they also have a clickable link in the chat that they can just go right from the chat.
Okay, so you've been given, you have an email prompt where you could answer there, or you can just go to the link that's in the chat box, and that link will also take you right to the survey. And what we'd like you to do, because we need this information now, unfortunately, in order to move forward, is we'd like you to fill out the survey. You'll see it's pull-down menus. You just click on boxes. It should go pretty quickly. All right, so I'm going to get quiet for a while to just give you time to take the survey. I practiced taking it yesterday and pretty much did okay at it. So good luck. Go ahead and get started. If you have a question or you're not sure about something, put it in the chat box and Debbie will help you. Oops, whoops. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so just keep working your way through it as you can. So as you finish, would you just use the chat box to let us know you're done? That would really be helpful to make sure you may not, you could still be working through it, but just as you finish, just use the chat box to let us know you're finished. You've completed the survey. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. And hang in there with us just for a minute or so, and then I'll wrap it up in about 2 minutes. Okay, so I want to invite all of you, of course, to finish the survey. Even as I'm wrapping up here, that'd be great. We really do appreciate this because we really need the information. We're doing this again on Thursday, and when we do it on Thursday, we'll be asking those participants that couldn't make it on today to also complete this. And if there were attendees from the year who couldn't make either date, we're actually asking them to complete this by Friday, so that we have the data that we can take to and kind of show where we're at realistically in a very objective way, where we're at with our work, at least based on your self-evaluation, which is really important to me in terms of your progress, and then also use it to help us identify areas of deeper work that we could take you into next year, which we want to do. We want to meet your needs when we come together next year. And over the summer, we'll create our plan and give you plenty of advance notice on what that will be. All right, with the 2 minutes I have left, I just want to share with you a couple of things. Just a final thought, I guess, in general. Number one, I'm very aware about going back to school. It's going to be definitely different, and anticipating what that feels like. You might not know it, but actually, you can probably tell from my office behind me. My bookshelves have papers on the back wall. Actually, so does this bookshelf. Pretty much the whole room does, because I'm working on a new book right now that'll come out next January. It's a follow-up to a book I wrote called Heart, and the book's on soul. But in writing this book on soul and the soul of our classrooms, one of the things that I've learned a lot about is the neuroscience behind the power of validation in our classroom. And there's quite a bit of brain research on this now, and I write quite a bit about it. And it's this idea of giving the kids what we call validation feedback, and I want to talk a little bit about what that is as we leave this school year. And I'm saying this because I think you have probably had to overextend yourself to a degree you never thought possible to provide this kind of validation feedback or validating feedback when students weren't with you directly. And like even this is so much harder for me with you because I'm not with you. It's to validate your work, which I want to do, but I'm not there to even high five you, which I couldn't even do if I was there right now. But validation is a process of recognizing, establishing, and confirming the worthiness of every child in your classroom. This is really important. Most kids, and especially now because of the fourth, are going to walk into your classrooms next fall and going, I suck at math. I am not worthy of being a math student in your classroom. And your job is to say, yes, you are. And not only that, but I'm going to help you feel that worthiness. What's interesting is there's some pretty clear research on the neuroscience evidence now on what's called the magic of validation as classroom teachers. and and that it bubbles up or oozes out of the way you and I give feedback to our students. And the challenge is that I'm giving you these comments, I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high expectations of you and of this class, despite the crisis, and I know you can reach them with my help. I am good enough to get you to reach my expectations, and that our feedback must always say that. In essence, it's a three-part story throughout the year. You are part of this class, therefore you have value. This class is special, therefore you have value. This class has high standards, therefore you have value. And more importantly, I believe you can reach those standards. So all the words that come out of my mouth have to be, I believe you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. It's a very interesting phenomenon what happens when we feel validated because of our actions, right? And it doesn't mean that I don't give you my students feedback that says, hey, you really screwed up on this. But the reason I'm giving you this feedback is because I believe you can do it though, right? So I think it's just an interesting way to think about this kind of, when I'm giving the feedback to my students, how am I letting them know I believe they can learn it so that they have their own self-efficacy, which is what? Self-efficacy is my belief as a student in my class, I can do what you want me to learn. And I just have a feeling that self-efficacy is going to be in the toilet when kids start this coming school year because of what, unfortunately, they went through. Not for all kids, but in math, for a lot of kids, just because it's like, oh, I just, man, that last quarter was so hard for me, and now I've got to start a next class. And so I just want to encourage you to think about how will you provide this type of validating feedback to your students in the course of next school year. With that in mind, I hope to see you personally next year at some point. That would be really nice. I'm hoping, I don't think it would be before September, October. I don't really want to come unless we can make it in person. So we're going to have to make sure we can pass all the CDC guidelines. I'll come if I have to wear a mask. That's fine too. But we definitely would love to see you sometime in the coming year. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for putting time in and being on the call with us. I hope what's ever kind of left, I know some of you are done. Some of you are kind of just finishing up this week. Some of you still have a couple of weeks. But no matter what's left, I hope that you have a safe and sane summer. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, ESU3, for doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
You might want to jump in before everybody leaves.
Yes, and here is the link. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot, for that unit planning tool that I walked everybody through today. It's just really simple. It's a bit link, so it's bit.ly, math unit plan tool, all one word, okay? And it's with the capital M at the start.
Thank you.
Please feel free to get that. Also, I gave it to Debbie, so she can send it out to everybody via email as well if for whatever reason the link doesn't work for you. So have a great day. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
I want to say thank you so much to Tim. I don't know if Tim can hear me talking or the rest of you. His comment about validation, I think your superintendents and your leaders have validated absolutely the importance of math, and they have said they want us to do this. The fact that you guys stuck with us all this time is great. You make me very happy to see your faces. You deserve so many good things to happen to you this summer. Thanks for being part of this group. Adios.
Thanks for sharing that link, Tim, because I did have a couple of comments in chat going, do we get that stuff Tim referenced?